You're on.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to City Council work session. Today is December 9th, 2024. It's approximately 1 p.m. I'm Mayor Eric Enriquez. I'd like if we could all stand for a moment of silence for our men and women that protect us in our military, and then also for our public safety, our police and fire that protect us 24/7, 365. To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we'll go ahead and start off with jobs of the week. If Sarah, you can come up. Thank you.
Maybe. There it goes. All right, thank you very much. My name is Sarah Rainey. I'm the one-stop coordinator for the Southwest region of New Mexico workforce. For Jobs of the Week, we have a community CAP program manager for the city of Las Cruces that starts at $45,000 a year, and right now it's a continuous posting. We also have a network administrator for the city. That one starts at $69,000, and it is also a continuous posting. We have an environmental specialist, 2, for the Northwind Resource Consulting out at White Sands Missile Range. That one closes on the 27th of this month. We have a front office coordinator and certified medical assistant for Christus Health. Both of those positions they close on the 28th of this month. And the job postings will list the pay on those as well. We have an all equipment operator. This one is a variety of gas and diesel mobile equipment skills that are required for Mansco. That posting closes on the 25th. We also have a tractor driver, a sorter, and pecan raker for Arnold Brothers. Those various closings depend on the vacancy of that company. As always, we're here to help. Right now, we're open from 8 to 6 p.m. We are open at lunch as well, so come down and see us at 226 South Alameda for any help. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Next, we have Pets of the Week. Carol?
I've worked with Pablo, so hopefully it works this week. My name is Carol Nelson. I'm with the Animal Services Center of the Mesilla Valley. I'm the digital content specialist. This week, our cat of the week, Diablo, great news, has actually already been adopted, so we're super excited about that. He was a pretty relaxed kitty, so we were pretty sure he was gonna get adopted, but our dog of the week is Aurora. Her number is 76296 if you wanna look her up on our website. She says, I'm an energetic girl who loves to be the center of attention and will happily shower you with affection. I'm great on the leash and know how to sit when asked. Plus, I'm a fast learner who loves to please. I have a lot of energy and can get a bit excited, sometimes jumping up and spinning around. So I'll need some training to help me channel that enthusiasm. With a little guidance and patience, I'll thrive in an active home and be your loyal, loving companion, ready for plenty of adventures. And this month we're running a holiday special for a home for ASC and V pets. All adoptions are $50. And coming up, we are working with a couple of organizations that are probably going to sponsor some adoptions, so stay tuned for that. And our usual discounts still apply even with our current special. And then this coming Saturday, we're going to have Paws in the Park. We're going to be at Young Park with our adoptable pets, so come by and see us. We'll be there from 11 to 2. And as always, you can visit our website for more information, or also check out our social media. We post fairly regularly on there for more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Next on the agenda is item 3.1, Realize Las Cruces for the final review and refinement progress. So Sarah Gonzalez.
Good afternoon, Mayor, City Council. Sarah Gonzalez with Economic Development. Before you is going to be the update on Realize Las Cruces and then an overview of what the Planning and Zoning recommended last month. To present essentially where we're at in the current process is Dawn Warwick. She is with Friesen Nichols, so she'll start the presentation and then I will jump in towards the middle.
Thanks, Sarah. Mayor, City Councilors, my name is Dawn Warwick. I'm with Friesen Nichols. Happy to be here to give you an update on where we are with the Realize Las Cruces project. And so with no further ado, we'll jump in. We've got about probably a 15-minute overview presentation before we get to a little bit more of the specifics, because we're kind of at the point where this is starting to come together and it's very exciting. We've got a few more things to iron out though. So as you see here, the team that's been working on this project includes those of us from Friesen Nichols. Karen Perez is here with me today. Erica Craycraft couldn't make the trip this time, so missing her. We also, of course, have our sub-consultants, Fred Lopez and Dana Kyle, who have been instrumental in helping to pull this together. So today we're going to just give you an overview of where we are, kind of where we've been and where we are. So just a recap of the process to date and talking about the highlights in the document itself in the updated land development code, as well as some major revisions, kind of what that looks like and where we're headed, so next steps, and then plenty of time for conversation. Key here is that we aim to utilize this conversation as a means of getting any additional feedback and direction so that the draft that evolves from today's meeting represents what you all will have in front of you in February at the point of adoption. So fingers crossed, we're just about there. So just to recap where we've been, the city went through a pretty extensive public engagement process to develop Elevate Las Cruces. That is your policy guide for land development, growth and development moving forward. And of course, this is one of the major implementation actions of Elevate Las Cruces, which is to align your development regulations with those policies that have been encapsulated in Elevate. A lot of the actions that are identified within the implementation section of Elevate Las Cruces are actions that are directly tied to an update to your development regulations. So one of the first things that we did was understand what the city adopted when they adopted a new comprehensive plan and how that ties directly to your development regulations. So this is just a snap of a section that was part of our foundational material, that in addition to stakeholder conversations and other research. So what that led to was the development of a scope for updating the code, and that meant touching a whole lot of different sections within your municipal code, including the ones that you see on the screen. Some of these were complete overhauls as far as just content. Others were more looking at the formatting and framework. So, but these were all areas of development regulations that needed to be aligned with Elevate Las Cruces and also needed to be incorporated into a document where they were not conflicting with themselves or any other elements of the city's regulations. So our scope included all of these. I think that's 10 sections right there. We began in March 2021 with the initial phase of the project that was divided into 3 phases. The first phase being the diagnostic evaluation, and of course that involved that sort of deep dive into Elevate. It also included talking to stakeholders, having some additional input online, particularly at the time it was still kind of an online environment, but also working with staff to understand that we captured what we needed to in a diagnostic report that gave us a roadmap for moving into phase 2, which is kind of just where all of the magic happened, maybe. It took the longest amount of time relative to the 3 phases of the project, but that really was where we took those 10 sections of the existing development regulations, reviewed them, updated them, and worked through iterations of each section to develop a full discussion draft, which has been sort of evolving through phase 3, which is the refinement and adoption phase of the project. So along the way, we have had code user interviews. I've mentioned more than 45 participants in that effort. We had a technical advisory. The city established a technical advisory committee, and the staff conducted and facilitated 33 meetings with that group. We conducted 4 open house meetings in the early fall of this year to gather public input on that draft document and understand where there were things that may still need to be addressed or worked through. Online commenting has been up and active. So far, we've received more than 270 comments, and the image on the right side of the screen is how that sort of manifests in the online environment. Just various, like sticky notes where people are asking questions or saying what they like or dislike about certain elements of the update. And then we've received more than 200 emailed comments. So all of that has been kind of worked into the draft that is posted and available for review. I believe that's dated October 15th. We've continued, of course, to find other things that need to be addressed, but that's kind of where we are. Major things that were that needed to be incorporated into this development regulation update really talked about alignment, like I said, with Elevate, and one of the key land use features in Elevate was the development of place types. And so as we developed zoning districts for your updated regulations, those zoning districts are either character-based or traditional. And so the character-based districts are your residential neighborhood 1, 2, and 3. So the level of intensity is identified by the 1, 2, and 3. And they're divided into character areas that are urban, suburban, or rural, just based upon the environment that, or the geography that those lots sit within. You'll also see within the menu of zoning districts, traditional districts such as commercial, retail, open space, and industrial districts. Also in that menu are overlay districts that are intended to reflect the overlay place types that are introduced in Elevate. Those include the mixed-use corridor, the town center, and neighborhood center. So the purpose of these, of course, is to provide locations that can have an increased density and provide the development pattern that support a more walkable environment. So those place types were reflected in mapping, and so along with the development of your code document itself, a zoning map has been evolving sort of alongside that to ensure that those place types have been located and placed in the right locations. So as that's evolved, then staff's done quite a bit of work on the mapping side of this to get the place types established in the proper geographies so that we're reflecting and acknowledging what's existing, but also reflecting what the future state is intended to look like based on Elevate. So the character areas and overlays are reflected on this graphic, and so those character areas, again, are the urban, suburban, and rural locations within the city. The updated regulations also include an updated menu of roadway cross-sections, and this, again, is to bring forward the future thoroughfare map that was established in Elevate to ensure that we're accommodating all of the different modes of transportation within the rights-of-way as much as possible. So the cross-sections are mapped within the regulations and identify opportunities for when there is a new street section or when there are modifications to bring things more into a section that addresses multimodal transportation and active transportation opportunities. Another element, or some other elements within the updated codes that are noteworthy, landscaping, trees, and parks. So these areas of the code got a full look and an update. Street trees to encourage the kind of breakup and the introduction of shade for both walkers and vehicles. Parking lot landscaping improving the situation within parking lots to have, trees to break up large expanses of pavement, which cause heat islands, screening and buffers just to break up the introduction of those parking and vehicular service areas and provide those buffers between adjacent lots, tree removal permits for trees that are larger than 6 inches in diameter, the introduction of a neighborhood park dedication and a trail dedication. Other items relative to Elevate and also the active transportation plan, building form standards, so introducing things like build to zones and how structures should be articulated in order to create the environment between buildings and between buildings and the street. The ability to better address what we refer to as missing middle, a variety of housing choices within neighborhoods. Introducing neighborhood service uses as permitted in areas that are closer to or integrated within neighborhoods so that they are walkable and convenient. Multimodal traffic impact analyses, so looking not only at vehicular trips, but also looking at trips for other modes of transportation as walkers and cyclists. And then enhancing and improving the connectivity within the city in general. So, since then, we have taken this through a variety of different conversations, and I think probably the June meeting is when we were back here and had some conversation with the city council. Some updates that have been made since we had that discussion and since we've also had some input from the community. At the time, the land use of cafe and local grocery were not permitted in the NH1 district by right, so that's been amended within the permitted use chart. Local retail in the NH1 district was previously permitted, but now is allowed with a special use permit if it is under 3,000 square feet. So smaller shops would be appropriate within that NH1 district with a special use permit. Drive-through is now prohibited within NH1. It was previously listed as a special use permit, but that was removed and is no longer permitted use in that NH1, kind of the lower intensity neighborhood district. Tap and tasting room was previously a special use permit in the NH3 district, and that's been changed to a permitted by right. So also in section 3.3, which is the permitted use chart, gas pumps and car washes in the NH3 district, if it is on a collector or hire, was previously a special use permit, and that has been amended to permitted. Cannabis production was prohibited. It was previously, a special use permit, and is now prohibited in the NH1 and NH2 districts. Halfway house is permitted by special use permit in the NH districts, all 3 of them, and sober living house is permitted by right, also in those 3 NH districts. Relative to multifamily, there were previously compatibility provisions that were introduced for duplex, triplex, and quadplex dwellings between those types of higher multifamily dwellings and single family. That was removed. Also relative to multifamily dwellings, previously there were 2 separate use categories that were multifamily 5 to 12 units and multifamily 13 units and above. Those were consolidated into a single use listing. And that is now allowed by right in the NH 1, 2, and 3 districts. Previously, the 5 to 12 category was a special use in NH 1, and the 13 and up was a special use in NH 1 and 2. So that's an amendment to what was previously in the permitted use table. We also removed compatibility provisions, which called for these multifamily dwellings to be located at collectors or higher, and included a particular type A buffer adjacent to single family. So basically, the purpose there was to ensure that more types of housing are accommodated in more of the neighborhood zoning districts without the compatibility requirements that were seen as barriers to affordable housing. And then we took this to the Planning Commission. I'm going to let Sarah cover those responses or recommendations.
Once again, Sarah Gonzalez with Economic Development. These will be the P&Z recommendations. We'll kind of go through chapter by chapter, do a short overview, and then we can come back and start answering any questions that council may have. For chapters 1, 2, and 4, there were no recommendations made by the Planning and Zoning Commission. Chapter 1 is going to be your general provisions. This is going to be your definitions, your appeal process, and then outlining essentially what the transitional zone will be. So this is going to be that 8-month time frame to where you could be using both codes as to which one you prefer to use, so we can actually identify to see if implementation is going properly or not. We'll be able to outline and identify anything that would need to be changed, so that way after 8 months we can come back with amendments to council. In chapter 2, that's going to be the historic preservation chapter, which is going to have, there were no recommendations made by the Planning and Zoning Commission, as we have revamped some of those terms or the conditions placed within the actual code. Chapter 4 is going to be your subdivision code, and so that there were no comments as to what subdivision regulations needed to be modified or changed. Our primary chapters for changes are going to be in chapter 3, which is our land use chapters, and then chapter 5, which will be related to parks, the dark sky ordinance, as well as our roadway constructions. So for chapter 3, it essentially started out with looking at the setbacks on properties and looking at our urban core. Our urban core is going to be defined primarily by your infill area, which is going to be 3 crosses to University, Trevize to Valley. So that is a very large urban core. It's currently where our MRAs are also located. One of the recommendations was to remove the minimum front setback and just rely on the build-to setbacks or build-to lines to actually develop. One thing staff had looked at was consideration of, we've determined that looking at setbacks and the build-to lines, but we haven't determined how it would change the facades or the street design if we had only build-to lines. And so that may become a compatibility issue. The second was to remove the minimum number of stories. There was essentially like a typo on the page where it had minimum and max. So it was, is there a minimum or a maximum of 5 stories? With that, we would never want to, put minimum on there as 5 stories, because that means someone has to build that. That's where the extended cost comes into play. The next one's going to be for a requirement for special use permits. To explain what a special use permit is that's going to require an additional process for anyone who's coming in from the public. Special use permit means you go to the Planning and Zoning Commission for approval. It means extended time, extended cost going into possibly an already developed property. One of their considerations was to remove drive-throughs within our urban core, mixed-use corridor, as well as our town centers, in order to increase basically your walkability standards within your urban core, but that is definitely a larger area to consider. The next was to provide a special use permit for all gas pumps located within the same general area. So you're also, once again, looking at your infill area, mixed-use corridors, as well as town centers. This also goes for car washes to be located within these areas. So you have 3 land uses, essentially your drive-throughs, your car washes, as well as your gas pumps to be located with special use permits and going through an extended process. Staff has recommended that our non-conforming provisions go up to 2 years instead of 1 year, knowing that it's very hard to get someone to come into a building once it's been vacant, but knowing that you also have to come into full compliance after 2 years. And so that would mean if any of our businesses currently right now were to go out of business and have these land uses, then they would be required to go through a special use permit to actually obtain it again. Another consideration was for special use permits to be done through payday loans, cash checking, and bail bonds within the NH2 and NH3 districts. The way that NH2 and NH3 are defined is primarily what you're looking at as far as your C1, C2 zones, and probably your R4 zones. So think of your high-density multifamily, what we currently have, and our lower conditional commercial land uses. Right now, there are conditions for other land uses to have collector or higher roadways, however, these don't. And so these are just considerations to think of these land uses moving forward. Lastly would be to require a special use permit on a commercial parking lot or garage within NH3, CR, or your industrial zones. One thing to consider within this provision is if you look at Bida Belgium, that is a business that currently has very limited parking on their property. They actually have designed and developed the property adjacent to it for a parking. So this would say that this would no longer be permitted. They would have to come into a public hearing to get this approved. So that would be a consideration. We would now go to chapter 5. First, we'll start off essentially with the roadway cross sections. A lot of the provisions through here were going to be for travel lanes, bike and pedestrian, and multimodal transportation. The first one is going to just be to replace words with, should and shall. We want to prioritize, and staff agrees with that. In all transportation decisions, we should be prioritizing the safety for all people using those actual transportation modes. The second one is going to be for amending any of the roadways with low travel speeds. A travel lane may also be used as a shared lane for bicyclists. That's currently already being done now. And so you already see that shared lanes are either within local roadways or they're using the shared multi-use path, but to basically add any calming measures that may need to be taking place. When you're looking at low speeds, you're looking at essentially your local roadways. And so a lot of times there's either going to be speed traffic mechanisms, parking on street, and so traffic is already going at a lower speed. Next would be is when parking is placed adjacent to a bikeway, the recommendation was to remove that it be on the street side and place it on the curb side. One of the things that staff considered is when you replace that, putting it on the curb side, is you actually do have blind spots when the bicyclist is getting back into traffic, so that needs to be considered as to where that curbside would be. One of the other items that I did notice in looking up from the urban bikeway design, it said you should actually place them on the curbside only when parking is not present. And so in this case, we would have parking present, and so we would be flipping it instead. So the recommendation would be to keep our roadway cross sections as they are in order to move that pedestrian or that bicyclist out of the way of traffic. Yes. Oops, skipped ahead. So our next one's going to be physical barriers within 3 feet should be required unless approved by DRC. And so essentially what you're trying to do is eliminate any vehicle traffic and pedestrian traffic from impeding each other. And so you're going to put up buffers. That could be curb and gutter, that could be the flag post that we see along Tell Shore, some kind of vertical structure that may separate out those buffered lanes. In order for staff, when we look at these, we'd rather use them as to be a requirement through DRC and not codified. A lot of these things are going to be taken into consideration with the use of our technical manual. So every road that we're going to design is going to go in there and say, what are our best practices? What's our current speeds? What's our local traffic? What are we actually looking at? Because they're all going to be different. That's the purpose of creating that technical manual, is when you codify something, if it doesn't work, it takes a lot longer for staff to come back to council to make that adjustment, whereas when we're using the technical manual, we're doing the best practices every day. Another one to consider was for local streets, sharrow marking shall not be approved unless accompanied by other traffic calming measures. When you're looking at local streets, a lot of times you're just using those, the streets are actually available for bikeways anyway, and so sharrows do create some of that confusion, and so staff's recommendation would be to remove sharrows altogether. Your traffic calming measures are going to be the parking, if there's going to be chicanes, reduced right-of-way, those are all going to become those traffic calming measures that are outlined or defined whenever they are going through their actual process for development. We then move to travel lanes shall not be wider than 11 feet across on the cross sections. One thing to consider within our actual cross sections, and there was that little note that was underneath them, is curb and gutter has not been taken into account on some of those street lane widths. And so it may say 13 feet, but when you have 1.5 foot gutters and curbs, it's less than that 13 foot. So we're already meeting those minimums that is required essentially to where we stay at a lower traffic speed. Because the lower your lane widths are, then your speed will actually come down. And so we've just got to reallocate where those roadway lines may be. But to understand that when you have a median, you have 1.5 foot curb. When you have another curb on the other side that may be by the bike lane, there's 3 feet that's not accounted for in the cross section that is coming from those travel lanes. Next would be removing one side of parking so that it's actually curb to curb for 30 feet. What that means is our local cross sections right now are 50 feet wide. So you have essentially your 2 6-foot lanes that are going to be for your sidewalks. You have 2 8-foot parking lanes, and then you have the 2 driving lanes that are 11 feet. If you remove one of the parking lanes on the actual roadway, it will reduce the cross section down to 42 feet, creating a 30-foot paved section. That also means that one side of the road cannot be parked on. Right now, we currently see a lot of development that is coming in. You usually have 2 cars parked in a driveway, and then people do park within those streets. So by eliminating that additional park lane, it now eliminates how much parking can actually be on the street. So we do lose some of our calming measures that are actually in place by just doing a general cross section. Lastly, for the roadway and intersection design is to follow NACTO's Urban Street Design Guide and Urban Bikeway Design Guide. These are actually going to be implemented into our actual technical manual. We would not be placing these into a codified one because as they continue to update, we want to continue to update. And we want to make it as easy as possible to do those updates. When we come to City Council, generally we're about 3 or 4 months into an actual session where we can use our DRC, which is our Design Review Committee, to come in and get those done within 2 weeks if we see that modifications are necessary. One other implication was to add that the Public Works Director may require an applicant to conduct a TIA. There's reasonable expectations that the project may adversely affect pedestrian or cyclist safety. Public Works had no concerns with actually adding this to our actual provisions and actually codifying this, as it does just reinforce what we are currently doing within our traffic standards now. Lastly was to add placement of traffic signals or other control devices shall not be predetermined based on the rigid and flexible design standards. Currently, this came from MUTCD standards. However, they have been modified, and so they were rigid, they were very difficult to use and implement, and they did have certain criteria. Because they've already done an update and we have adopted that updated version, we would say that all of these are actually being addressed through our technical manual. And so these would not have to be codified to say that we are looking for existing controlled access for our pedestrians and our bicyclists, or that all users particularly are not being accounted for whenever they're being done. So we are using these practices currently right now. One comment came up as far as our low impact development, and one was just to remove the last sentence because we do understand that it actually affects everything. And so it doesn't say for only appropriate for larger greenfield developments. We need to understand that it's gonna be appropriate for any greenfield developments. And so the last sentence was just requested to be removed. Next, we would move on to essentially our parks section within the development code. There was a request to add language to dedicate for open space or unimproved parkland to include areas for restoration provided by a developer if it completes the restoration activity. So if you find some open space area and a developer is willing to actually renovate and make that part of their open space, that could be part of their calculations for their park dedication land. Next would be to replace non-residential with mixed-use development and remove the exceptions. And so what we were noticing was that there was a certain criteria for commercial land development that you would actually be providing open space dedication through there. And there was a mixed version as to if it was non-residential, commercial and industrial standards, or if it was mixed-use development. And so mixed-use development is when you do see those residential and commercial components, which would need to provide those parkland dedications. The next was to add language regarding flexibility in our urban development for park development. Some of those concerns were to say, if you're in the urban core, we understand that there's not the 3-acre minimum that's required to dedicate. And so it may need to be adjacent properties that are located next door, where you have the ability to purchase that land, add it into acreage, or you can actually provide some trail system on your property that's going to connect to an adjacent property. So you're opening up essentially what opportunities the urban can actually do their dedication with the means that are actually available. Two of the recommendations by the Planning and Zoning Commission were to, one, either table this section of the development code until the park impact fee update was approved, and then come back to revisit this section. The second was a consideration that if the section was to be adopted, that council consider reimbursement of 50% to the development of those neighborhood parks. And meaning if right now currently our parks section is written as you would do dedication and improvements, and there would be no park reimbursement whenever you're developing your neighborhood parks, because that reimbursement is going to be going to community parks. And so you would have two considerations, or however City Council would like to proceed forward. Next would be to eliminate buffer requirements between residential, which is our NH zones, and our C zones within the urban place types, mixed-use corridors, and town centers. Staff has no concerns with that. A lot of times when you see development coming in, you want the mixed-use development. Buffers are going to be something that is a rock wall. It's going to be your shrubbery, your trees. It's going to create sometimes that barrier that if a developer wishes to put them in, they will still put them in even if the requirement's not there. However, if it's not a requirement, then it gives more flexibility as to making that space a walkable or adjoining area. Lastly, there was mention to input essentially the dark skies ordinance into replacing our current outdoor lighting. We did have a gentleman come forward and speak at both city council meetings. Albuquerque just adopted the dark sky ordinance. And so with that, staff is looking at, we would probably come back and do a work session with city council as a consideration. We're not saying it shouldn't be off the table, but we do need to look at it and how it would actually affect implementation. Some of this would need to be affecting on residential as well as commercial, which would be something new. We have to identify any of the cost for new development, what that's going to impact neighbors that are now installing or putting lights onto their home. So it's a process that staff can bring forward through that 8-month transition period and actually work with the development community as well as neighbors to understand what this would mean whenever development does come in or whenever development is modified. So we have our next steps.
Okay. Obviously, we will spend some time today getting a handle on where things are, what adjustments the city council is interested in seeing before this document is ready to be brought back to you. So the next steps, every time we present, seem to get shorter, which is kind of nice. But today is of course, conversation about making sure that we're in the right place and that questions have been answered and discussion has been had, and then preparing the final draft of the update and zoning map to bring to you hopefully for adoption in February. So that's all I have on next steps, and we have time to discuss.
All right, well, thank you for that. What I was going to mention, what I would like to do is, I know there's a couple of groups, organizations that would like to have some time to speak, and then maybe some public input, and then at the end, if it's okay, then council questions and discussion items, and then we'll bring staff back to address some of those issues after we hear from everyone. Everyone's okay with that?
Sounds good. If
Okay.
I need to leave, can I leave my questions with someone else?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So I know the home builders had wanted to speak, and the historic preservation. What I requested was a spokesperson to come up and get 7 to 10 minutes to speak on their group's behalf. So do we have anyone? The historic preservation, if you want to come up first.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Dr. Judy Berryman, current chair of the Historic Preservation Commission. I will share my 10 minutes with other members of the commission that may want to make an additional changes. As chair, it is important to recognize the work that has gone into the current draft of Realize Las Cruces, particularly the changes made to Chapter 2, which is now Chapter 35. In terms of historic preservation, in many cases, Chapter 5 is a stronger document. Items such as historic resources don't need to be in a district to be protected. The city is now liable for demolishing historic structures without due process, and the topic of deconstruction has been added. The revised document also reflects the need to add 2 existing historic districts into the legacy zoning. As noted in Realize Las Cruces, historic preservation is an important component within the document. Much of the material found in Chapter 35, which is now originated from Chapter 40. The value of this document is clearly demonstrated with the transfer of the definitions, duties, procedures into Realize Las Cruces. However, work still needs to be done to reflect the original intent of the Historic Preservation Ordinance. These 2 changes to the drafts that are critical to operationally the intent of Realize Las Cruces and securing the place of historic preservation in the future of our city. To meet these goals stated in Section 2.1, I'm asking the following 2 changes to be made. 1, that HBC be retained as a commission, not a committee. And 2, the position of historic preservation specialist be spelled out and be reinserted within the document. So the retention of the term Historic Preservation Commission, commission or committee, why is that important? I'm going to abbreviate some of my discussion because what I want to discuss is we have been told that we need to align the term commission or committee with the Muni City Code of Ordinances. And I want to go through that very briefly. So the Muni Code, City Code Ordinance, Article 4, Division 3, Subdivision 16, was adopted in February 5th. Division 3 defines non-standard boards. Section 16, title is the Historic Preservation Committee. Now, if we assume this is an error, then it's an error, but it's sort of immaterial at the moment. The further sections, 576, use the term commission throughout the document. However, within the Muni Code, if you go into the supplemental history, it clearly states that Council Bill 20011, Ordinance 2903, I'll read it. It states to add a new non-standard board, the Historic Preservation Commission. This change was adopted in December 2, 2019 by both Planning and Zoning and by the City Council by unanimous decision. So what does this mean? The discussion of committee versus commission is really immaterial. Unless the council or is planning on changing the Muni Code, the administrative code, it stands as HPC is a commission. I'm not going to go into the duties of the commission because I think we all agree to what that is. I would also like to point out that the city of Las Cruces has become the 10th city within New Mexico to gain CLG status. In brief, CLG is an acronym for Certified Local Government, is a unit of local government that has been certified to become a participating partner in national state historic preservations. To be eligible to apply, a community must make a historic preservation ordinance, which the city has, and 2, it clearly states establish a local preservation commission, which it has. So in order to close this argument, there really is no basis for us to be discussing community, committee or commission. HPC is the commission. The second item that we would like is to reinsert the term historic preservation specialist in the current realized Las Cruces. Why is this important? The term historic preservation specialist has been replaced with the term community director or a designee appointed by the community director. I would suggest the wording be changed to, if we cannot use the word historic preservation specialist, I would change it to say the community director, a designee, or a consultant that meets both state and federal guidelines. So that would meet the needs of the CLG and would meet the needs under what established under the Muni Code. So why is this important? The historic specialist must meet qualifications under state and national preservation laws. The position of HPC is not a generalist that can be appointed as needed. It requires one with specialized training and experience. If this position is important enough to be hired and filled, it should be clearly listed in the glossary and with the document outlining job responsibilities. So in conclusion, at this time, we are requesting 2 items. Reinstate the term commission in realized Las Cruces. 2, reinstate the position of historic preservation specialist rather than a general appointee. I would also suggest that the definitions referring to historic preservation that are currently in the glossary be put back into chapter 35 so it makes the document easier to read. So I'm going to give up the rest of my time to members of the commission or the public that would also like to comment. Thank you very much. Jerry, did you want to?
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Dr. Jerry Wallace. I'm the director of the Public History Program at NMSU. So I really appreciate all the comments that Dr. Berryman just stated about the future of historic preservation, and that's what I actually would like to take in a couple of minutes to just kind of talk about. And the 2 things that kind of outline my just sort of brief talk here is thinking about collaboration and stakeholders in the future of historic preservation in the city of Las Cruces. We are the 2nd largest city in the state, and I would like to see moving forward the ability to expand our historic preservation portfolio. We have a number of communities within our city that are worthy of nomination. This year alone, the Belema districts, both of them, both the original is 72 years old, and then the Loma Heights is 64 years old. Those alone could add to our historic preservation portfolio. One way that I think, one thing that I would love to do is collaborate with the city. I don't think we talk about collaboration enough, and I feel like one way that we could collaborate with the city, both the Historic Preservation Commission, but also where we could get a lot of community buy-in in our city would be to create a historic preservation plan. And the plan, I think, would be something that would have a 5-year plan with 1- and 3-year markers in which we could have this sort of, common ground between the city, a lot of different community members, whether they're neighborhoods or districts, and in addition to that, with the Historic Preservation Commission. I think that community plan or that historic preservation plan could really build a strong relationship and a future for historic preservation within our city. So I would really love to see within like 10 or 15 years us get up to the status of Albuquerque. I'm always very envious when I go up there. I go up there several times a month to do research. And I'm just so jealous of how well organized they are with historic preservation, and I think that we could easily do that if we had a historic preservation plan. So I want to thank you for your time and allow somebody else to speak.
Faith Hudson for the record. Good afternoon, councilors, mayor, and city manager. I also want to echo what Dr. Berryman has said. I want to speak about the HPC remaining a commission. It's not a power trip, it's not ego, it's about following the letter of the law. Ordinance 2903, sections 2-582 to 587, which was adopted on December 2nd, 2019, added a new non-standard board, Historic Preservation Commission. Ordinance 2938, Council Bill 21-005, adopted August 17th, 2020, as amended, transferred the duties of the South Mesquite Design Review Board to the Historic Preservation Commission. Under the current version of the municipal code, which is October 14th of 2024, and what is posted on the website, it is also the hyperlink that is in Chapter 2 of Realize Las Cruces. Only in the title is HPC referred to as a committee. The rest of the ordinance, the word used is commission. So, having said that, the language clearly states that HPC is a commission, and unless council will be voting to amend the administration portion of the chapter in the language of Realize Las Cruces, they must follow the current ordinance, and the HPC must remain a commission. Thank you very much.
Mayor, Council, Dr. Paul Deason for the record. Simply as a certified local government with a commission and a historic preservation specialist, there is a great deal of money available for historic preservation, cultural preservation from the federal and the state. Thank you.
Joe Ruprecht, another PhD, and not speaking as a member of the commission. I want to come...
Let me go ahead and give the time now to the home builders, and then after we'll open it up for public, about 2 minutes for public to speak.
Okay, I wasn't clear on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of City Council. John Moscato here because the Home Builders Group asked me to speak about a couple of items. Fortunately, there are not very many items for which we have problems at all with the document. We look forward to Council's adoption early next year. But there are a couple I'd like to speak about, and there might be members who want to mention one or two more. The first item is simply a process item. As Sarah mentioned, the setup in Realize is that there's a use designation, which is zoning, and a character designation, which is either rural, suburban, or urban. It's our understanding that to amend or to change zoning and character would require a two-step process. You'd have to go through a zoning application, and then because of the character change, you would need to elevate Las Cruces because of the place types established there. What we would recommend is that somehow the document establish a single-step process so that staff's time, council's time, developer time would not be taken up with a lengthier two-step process. But mostly I want to talk about section 5.5, which is parks. A couple of items before I get to the main event. In 5-5C, there's a calculation for how to come up with the amount of parkland to be dedicated. And we really don't have a problem with that calculation, because when you run the calculation, if you had, say, a 100-lot development, you'd have parkland needing to be dedicated just less than 3/4 of an acre. You'd have to get up to about a little over 400 lots to require the 3-acre dedication. However, later in the document, there's reference to a 3-acre minimum. What that's going to do is actually decrease the number of parks being developed in the city. And there's a very simple reason for that. Because if you had, say, 20 acres that you're developing, and you have a 3-acre minimum, you're going to be required to dedicate 15% of your total land mass for a park. Well, no developer is going to want to do that. The net result is that they're going to do the fee in lieu, which means the city will get funding, but it won't get parks. So there'll be fewer parks, not more parks. So why not just stick with the calculation in 5.5C, which establishes the calculation for park area dedication? Why include on top of that a 3-acre minimum that would actually decrease the number of parks being developed in the city? Another somewhat procedural issue, there's mention that the dedication would be required to take place before recording of the plat, before the city signs the plat for the plat to be recorded. Well, the plat recording is how the dedication takes place. So to say that the dedication has to take place before the city signs the plat, which would lead to the recording, means that you're really putting the cart before the horse. You need to have the plat recorded for the dedication to take place. But the bigger issue is really what we don't know. And what we don't know is what the total impact of the exclusion of reimbursing to the developer for the cost of parks, what that will do to the overall cost of housing. The reason why Planning and Zoning Commission recommended that the Section 5-5 be paused until after establishment of the new park impact fee is just because we don't know what the impact's going to be. The last time the Parks and Recreation Department's consultant recommended an increase in park impact fees a little over 5 years ago, it was a doubling of the park impact fee. If that happens again, and if council would adopt that increase, that's going to be over a $5,000 increase in the park impact fee. On top of that, the developer's cost of construction would be passed on to the home builder, which would be passed on to the home buyer, which would result in another $2,000 or $3,000 charge to the home buyer. So the home buyer would be paying through what's charged to the home builder. They'd be paying over $5,000 in park impact fee. They would be paying over $2,000 or $3,000 in the cost of construction of the park that's no longer being reimbursed. So you're looking at a total of $7,000 or $8,000. If you had a smaller townhome, say $150,000, $180,000 townhome, that's going to result in a 5 or 6% increase in the price of those homes. And those are the lowest priced homes for the bulk of the population who couldn't afford a more expensive home. So, why is that being done now in advance of the park impact fee being set? I can't really answer that other than to think that maybe it's easier to push this through now, not knowing what the impact is. I would recommend to you that you really should know what the total impact fee is going to be on the cost of housing, which you don't know, I don't know, nobody knows, because the park impact fee hasn't been set for next year yet. I also wonder why all of a sudden there's a need for this extra funding where the developer's no longer being reimbursed for the cost of parks. For the last 10, 12 years, the company I've been associated with has built and given to the city about 15 parks, probably more than the city's ever seen developed in that length of time. During that time, the park impact fee total available collected and in the fund has gone in from 2019 to now from 4 million to over 7 million. So if there's that much money consistently in the park impact fee fund to be spent, why all of a sudden is there a need? Well, we're told that there's a need because we need that funding for community and regional parks. But I think all of us know that community and regional parks have never been funded through park impact fees. There's never going to be enough park impact fee money just from, unless you raise it to $10,000, $20,000 per lot, which I don't think you'd want to do. There's never going to be that much money. There are other sources of funding for community and regional parks. To put it on the burden, to put that burden on home buyers, and that's really where the burden is. It's not on the developer, it's not on the builder, it's on the home buyer. To put that burden on the home buyer for community and regional parks, which are city-wide amenities, and to place that specifically as a burden on these new residents in neighborhoods doesn't seem to me to be a fair way to approach it, especially when you look at the overall impact, which we don't know what it's going to be, but it could be $7,000, it could be $8,000, nobody knows. So why not put a pause on the adoption just of 5-5? Sarah mentioned there's going to be an 8-month review. By the time that 8-month review comes around, you will have set the new park impact fee. You'd know what the impact's going to be. I don't think there's any detrimental harm to the city in waiting another 8 months, especially since the system that's been in place for the last 10, 15 years has worked very well anyway. So why rush into it? Why not take your time, come at it with eyes wide open later next year, and just deal with 5-5 at that point? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moscato. Now I'll open it up to the public. Anyone wishing to speak we'll allow you 2 minutes. Katrina, if you want to come up and assist anyone that wants to come in to the microphone and speak.
Hello, my name is Mackenzie. I'm here to speak about the RV parking code that a full-size RV park over 1 ton parking in the front yard on the property, not the street, but on the property. So right now, RV parking is allowed, but when we are trying to partially use it for business. For example, set up what I did partially, set it up in the farmer's market as a display. Even though it's only 3% of the time that I'm using it, and 97% of the time I'm still using as a regular RV, and then I cannot use it. I cannot do that. I will have to move it to a commercial parking lot. That's what I'm facing right now. So that's how it can be interpreted. And I just think that it's something that needs to be changed because New Mexico State has changed the Cottage Food Act for small business to have a better business environment to succeed. Normally, when people trying to start up, you will be just using part of it. For example, in the same part of the code, it says there's 25% for home occupation business. You can use 25% of the house, which it doesn't address on that part of for vehicle over 1-ton parking on the property. And so the proportionality doctrine says the purpose of a regulation must aim to achieve legitimate public interest necessity. The regulations should not impose more restriction than necessary to achieve its purpose. The regulation benefits must outweigh the burden it imposes on individuals, which right now this is kind of a burden on us, which trying to start a small business, just only 3%, which is insane. My time is up, so thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I guess we'll try again. Joe Ruprecht, longtime resident. I want to just speak very quickly about some of the history of historic preservation efforts in Las Cruces. And this is part of why I think you've heard a number of us making very pointed arguments and deeply felt arguments to keep historic preservation as a commission. And historically, it's because it originates out of an ad hoc committee that worked for years to get to the point of getting something approved or put forward before City Council, and to get to the point where we actually have a commission. And to go backward now to a committee is a slap in the face, and it disregards a lot of the work that's gone into getting to this point. The other thing is that I think some of you are aware, but the commission has been laboring under a number of difficulties in these startup years. This is a commission that has only been up and running for about 4 years, and it's been in uncharted territory, and it's gotten very mixed messages at times from city staff, some of who are no longer with the city, about what the commission can do, what the commissioners can do, what the purpose is. And the current chair, Judy Berryman, and the current commissioners, I've seen them start getting this sorted out. And they deserve to be able to keep that status. Maybe what you could do is put in a review clause so that the status of this committee question, rather than commission, is reviewed after a certain number of years. I think for most anybody you could talk to on the street, commission is seen as a more permanent body with stronger standing and with quasi-legal status, that you have to pay attention to what their recommendations are. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Lisa Parrott, excuse me, Lisa Parrott, and I'm a resident of District 6. I have in my hand our duly recorded warranty deed joint tenants dated October 30, 1997, proving that Dan and I own our residence. This deed incorporated by reference protective covenants filed September 11, 1989 by the owners of what is known today as High Range, which I also have. These protective covenants, which are, quote, binding upon the respective grantees, their successors, and assigns, end quote, state in part, quote, The purpose of these covenants is to ensure the use of the property for attractive residential purposes only, to prevent nuisances, to secure each site owner the full benefit and enjoyment of his property, end quote. Quote, all lots described above are hereby declared to be residential lots, and no lot shall be used for other than residential purposes. There shall not be allowed on any lot any structure which allows more than one family to reside therein, end quote. Quote, no building shall exceed 2 stories in height, end quote. Quote, no noxious or offensive activity shall be carried on upon any lot, nor shall anything be done therein which may be or may become an annoyance or nuisance to the neighborhood. With all due respect, it is my opinion that while as elected officials of we the people, you do have the authority to establish codes and ordinances which affect our real property, you cannot, however, create and or pass any code or ordinance that has the power to supersede or usurp the protective covenants which were filed for the purposes of protecting our property. For purposes of discussion only, if the council did have the authority to totally disregard the residents' protective covenants and proceed, thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm George Pearson. I'm Vice President of Las Cruces, the bicyclist and pedestrian advocacy organization. I'm here to ask that bicycle parking be required for certain existing properties and not just for new properties. People won't use bicycles if there isn't a secure location to lock their bicycles at their destinations. Commuter bicyclists would stop at stores on their way home. Some bicyclists have no other transportation choice, so this is an equity issue. Why is this direction from City Council reflected in ordinance needed? We can speak to local business owners and often convince them to install bike parking. However, when we speak to corporate businesses, the response is, that's decided by corporate and I can't do anything. Council can step in and tell the Walmarts and Albertsons that don't have bike parking to add bike parking. You've shown tell the corporations what to do with your shopping cart ordinance, for example. The consultants presented a slide at P&Z that would require specific requirements for big box style properties. This is the type of requirement that doesn't have to apply to every business, but to the ones where they're really needed. Adding bike parking needs to be one of those requirements. I have 8 pages of signatures on a petition asking for bike parking. Please include bike parking requirement in the final adoption and realize Las Cruces under the 5-2.n.5.ai. Add another letter to require for existing properties of certain size. And I'd like to submit the petition to the clerk.
Mayor Pro Tem, council members, my name is Jim Wilcox. I'm a member of the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, but I am not to speak on that behalf. I'm the bicycle representative. I want to expand on what Mr. Pearson just said, pointing out that many people do not have access to cars because they're too expensive for their budget, or because they have lost their license, or because they have a mental condition that precludes them from being able to get a license. So this is an equity issue that people who want to who have to use a bicycle don't have adequate parking. And if that bike is stolen, that's their only means of transportation. They are out of luck. Now, you might think, okay, I can understand that. That's certainly important, but consider this. When I park my car, yes, I do drive a car and I use the bike. When I park my car in a parking lot and I go to, say, Albertsons, and I go inside, when I buy something, the cost of that parking lot is included in the cost of the food. Those parking lots aren't free. They pay taxes on them. They have to maintain them. So when I go in, I use my car, I'm paying a little bit to maintain that parking lot. But somebody riding their bike, who has to ride their bike, goes in, pays for a product, pays for part of that parking lot, and gets nothing in return. That's not just an equity issue, that's not fair. And so we need to require these businesses, start out with the ones like supermarkets where a lot of people are going and saying, we expect over a certain amount of time, you got time to save up maybe $1,000 to install bike parking, give them a year or two, but require it. Require it for equity and require it for fairness. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Donald Wilson. I'm the current president of Las Cruces, and I just want to reiterate our request for the City Council to consider the adoption of bike parking requirements in the Realize Las Cruces upgrade. I've lived in this city since I was 4 years old. I've ridden a bicycle since I could go to elementary school and then middle school and junior high. That's what it was called back then. In high school, university, and I ride a bicycle now often. And I run into this problem that they've talked about, which I get to a business and there's no place for me to lock up my bicycle. I go to my bank, I have to lock it to a flagpole that's out in the parking lot. I go to the dollar store, I have to lock it to a light that's across the parking lot from the door to the business. I would just like this to be something that the City Council considers. This is the time to do it with the upgrade to Realize Las Cruces. The equity issues that Jim talked about are real. I work with the community bike shop. We have a lot of customers that come in that bicycle is their only form of transportation. We want them to be engaged, be part of our community, be able to access businesses, business opportunities, and bike parking is a simple thing the city can advocate for so that individuals all have access to our business community. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name's Kent Thurston. I guess Mayor Pro Tem and councilors. I'm a home builder, land developer, and also I sit on the Planning and Zoning Board, or not board, commission. There's a couple of things that when I was on the commission that caused me to reflect and figure out, okay, is this being done right? So I'm not necessarily for or against what I'm going to say as of right now. It's more of a, I think these are things that need to be actually discussed a little bit further. There were things that weren't totally clear to me. And it really has to do with just the fundamental changes with the parks side of things. So here was a couple of fundamental things that I thought were some key points to me that I wanted to point out. Number one, neighborhood parks are no longer reimbursed. Number two, there's also a creation of a new park fund outside of the park impact fees. How is that going to be established and controlled? Those were some things. Number three, the park fee study wasn't complete. Without it being completed, we don't have the full data to really make a decision as to which way to go. And also, those were some of them. I'm gonna run out of time, but also, I wish I think I'll just have to email you guys my sheet of what I really had. I had like, all of my parks was red noted and there was a whole bunch of things in there. I think there's a lot of good things in there that'll be a shift of what we need, but then also it really does come back to the last point I wanted to talk about is just the affordability of the houses. There has to be a way that we have some give and a take, that we are getting better parks for the city, but then also being mindful of how do we do that and not affect the housing prices to increase. So, because we understand that parks are good for us, it creates all of the other health benefits for us, but then also not being able to own a home also can create some other detriments to us. So those are some points I'd want you to just focus in on. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Nick Chignoli, and I'm a student at NMSU. This is just regarding the housing code. There is an endless amount of data that indicates housing as a primary social determinant of mental and physical health. Housing security is correlated to everything from clinical depression to low birth weight. By allowing higher density houses, we are providing an opportunity for the diverse lifestyles of Las Cruces. These multi-unit residences and accessory dwellings help provide Gen Z and millennials with opportunities to save money as they enter the workforce. It allows service workers to live closer to their place of employment and seniors and veterans on fixed incomes to have appropriate accommodations. These accessory dwellings also provide an opportunity for supplemental income as well as a culturally responsive way for multi-gen families to stay together. I think it's worth noting that the recent literature review indicated that provisional housing reduced Medicaid usage by 12%. The use of a primary care physician rose 20%, while emergency room visits decreased by 18%. The actual offset cost of housing has mixed data, but one study indicated that secure housing offset healthcare costs by $29,000 per person annually. So housing security saves money. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jody Crowley. I'm with the Las Cruces chapter of the AARP. I don't know how many of you are aware, but AARP was founded when Ethel Percy Andrus found a school teacher living in a chicken coop. So housing has been close to our hearts ever since. The two issues I wanted to commend the people for considering are walkability, and the ability to create ADUs. Both of these have to do with allowing our seniors to age in place, which leads to better health outcomes and better income, okay? So ADUs allow multi-generational families to create a space which is accessible and safe for our seniors and delays moving into assisted living. And of course, walkability is important for keeping people active and involved. So thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and councilors. My name is Ruth Jari, and I'm an affordable housing advocate and spent my career in Washington, D.C. advocating at the federal level for affordable housing and community development programs. First, I want to thank the staff and the Technical Advisory Committee and the consultants for their efforts to modernize our development code. I'm sure it's not an easy task trying to develop a code that will meet our many needs over the next 20 years or so. But we're here, and I'm asking you to support the draft of Realize Las Cruces that is before you now. In particular, I support Realize Las Cruces because it allows developers to build a variety of styles and types of housing that are integrated across the city's zoning districts. This will lead to more diverse neighborhoods throughout the city, which will accommodate the various incomes of our residents and the types of homes in which they choose to live. I believe Realize Las Cruces allows us to continue growing in a way that is envisioned by Elevate Las Cruces. I sincerely encourage you to support the current draft. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Beth Bardwell, and Mayor, councilors, and staff. I'm here today on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Southern New Mexico to speak in support of the proposed changes to the Land Development Code, including the design standards and the zoning districts that are set forth in the October 15th draft. I believe that these proposed changes are an important piece in your collective work of addressing the housing shortage and lack of affordable housing here in Las Cruces. These proposed changes will make it easier to increase housing options and promote a variety of housing styles and types for rent and for purchase, such as accessory dwelling units, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, and apartments that are integrated within the community. This means all households, including but not limited to seniors, first-time homebuyers, and working families, will be able to find less expensive housing within city limits, close to their work, increasing their household incomes to pay for other necessary expenses that allow them to thrive, such as healthcare, education, food, and clothing. So I want to thank you and staff for supporting the proposed changes.
Mayor, city councilors, staff. My name is Liz Rodriguez Johnson, and when I was a teenager, we moved to Las Cruces from the lower Rio Grande Valley in Texas because it was getting too difficult for my dad to get a job. So we had to move to Las Cruces. And with no money, our only option was to move in with my uncle, with my uncle and my aunt and 12 kids, that was 14 people. We were 8 kids and 2 adults, so that was 24 people in total. We moved into a 3-bedroom, 1 bath. My guess is about 1,200 square foot home, very small house. And I don't know how long we lived there, but it was a matter of months. And to describe the logistical and emotional issues involved with something like that would do it no justice. But I did have the opportunity to attend New Mexico State and spent the bulk of my DOD career in the Washington, D.C. area. And my husband and my family decided to move back to Las Cruces, retire here, where one of my goals is to give back as much to this community as it gave me. So to that end, excuse me a minute. The proposed changes in Realize Las Cruces Land Development Code will make it easier to increase housing options and promote a variety of housing styles and types for rent and purchase that integrate it within the community, benefit families like mine. Thank you.
Hi, my name is John Holtzman. I'm the chair of the State Council of a chapter of New Mexico Dark Sky International and a local resident, and I wanted to provide some additional information on what staff mentioned about the outdoor lighting and Realize Las Cruces. Dark skies are an incredible resource that we have in Las Cruces and New Mexico and help to attract people here. Unfortunately, we're gradually continuing to lose them. Fortunately, it's been recognized that the implementation of responsible lighting can preserve our dark sky heritage and its benefits for human health, ecology and environment, cost and energy savings, while at the same time actually improving safety and security. It's simply a matter of using as much light as needed, putting it where and when it's needed, and using light of an appropriate color. I commend city staff for incorporating many principles of responsible lighting and Realize Las Cruces. However, there have been some recent developments that have indicated the need for some improvements. About a month ago, my parent organization, Dark Sky International, released some new model template ordinances and also announced a program by which ordinances can be certified as dark sky recognized, and it would be super cool if Las Cruces could be the first one. I passed on the draft ordinance to Dark Sky International, and their consultant identified a number of areas in which our ordinance can be improved and indicated the changes that would be needed to achieve certification. making all these changes right now is probably a little too much to ask, given how far along we are in the process. As staff indicated, hopefully the council can come back and revisit this in a larger picture in upcoming months, and I encourage you to recommend that. In the meantime, there are two, I think, small but really highly impactful changes in the current version of Realize that could be made to improve things. One, refine the definition of what is meant by shielded lighting to incorporate the most modern definition, and two, to restrict the color of new lighting across all lighting zones. Right now, and Realize it's just across a couple lighting zones. So I've communicated details to staff, and I would like to request that the council direct them to consider these. Thank you.
First time I've been in here, ever. I'm a resident. My name is Craig Charnoff of Las Cruces. We moved here 9 years ago. I've witnessed a lot. I don't have much compassion for developers. They build minimal products. Land development is substandard. Housing, per your own inspectors, other than the National Building Code, everything else is minimal. It's deplorable. This city I came through in 1995. 1995, it was a great little village then. It was exceptional. I was impressed. The questions I pose with the zoning changes that you're thinking about, would you want a dispensary next to your house? Would you want a tea shop? Would you want another coffee shop? Would you want a gas station? Because it's possible. I'm going to run out of time, and I'm going to keep talking. There's issues here that need to come into play. Apartments are not necessarily affordable housing. I worked in the affordable housing market for 38 years in other states. Development. Let's bring corporate America back to Las Cruces. Macy's pulled out. Let's bring Panera. Let's bring Carrabba's. Let's bring civilization and expansion in the right way. Section 5C on parks, I think it's a responsibility of the developers to offer green areas and parks. I think it's their responsibility to finish lots all the way to the streets where rock walls butt up to. They should finish the lots. They have a responsibility to the residents that they market their products to, regardless of cost. They pass the cost on to the buyer anyway. What difference does it make? I have deed restrictions. Deed restrictions and covenants should take precedence over anything else. I bought a house. I don't want a gas station next door to me.
Sir, your time is up.
Yeah,
But
I
thank you.
understand that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You ready? Yeah, thank you all. We'll go ahead, council, with their questions, and staff can come up afterwards, and we can see what the next steps are. All right, Councilor Grant.
Thank you. One kind of just bigger picture thing that everyone's heard from me a few times, and then two specific questions on the presentation. First, tremendous thanks to staff. If you were on the TAC, can you raise your hand if you're here? Thank you. Truly appreciate the work that everyone has put into this, and just even the small sample of comments today show how many stakeholders and sentiments and industries and feelings we're trying to juggle. So I just want to acknowledge what an incredible process this is and thank everyone who has been involved. As I've said before, my priorities coming into this recognizes that creating flexibility in zoning codes to allow for greater housing density, greater housing types, mixed-use neighborhoods is one of the few things that a local government can actually do in the face of larger state, regional, federal pressures, and I'm so happy to see that we're moving in this direction. I've said this before too, love my neighborhood in a C2. So I'm in a C2 mixed zone commercial, have great neighbors, can walk to See Senor Express, so I don't have to sit in the drive-through line, so you can get a little bit of walkability in that for my burritos. And recognizing the fact that not all neighborhoods look alike, not all neighborhoods have to be alike, and all neighborhoods are equally valuable to the people who call them home. So just wanted to say that. And now to, again, I don't know if I should get this far into the weeds, but can I ask questions to 2 slides? Thanks. Oh, actually, just 1 slide. 34, please. And I'm going to turn to just 2 kind of general public safety questions. So I'm going to turn first to Chief Smith, not Chief Smith. Hey, DC. Sorry, so to the first bullet, travel lanes shall not be wider than 11 feet across all street cross sections. I want to make sure that all fire apparatus can respond safely, efficiently, and not just be in the lane, but open their doors. And I think that we need something a little wide. I know you're not Mark Dubbin or Chief Smith, but would you like to say who you are?
Yeah, I'm Deputy Chief Sean Heck. Thank you, Counselor. Yeah, right now the average width of a fire truck is anywhere between 8 to 10 feet, depending on the apparatus type. And you're right, at 11 feet, that doesn't really give us much room to open doors, and it also, more importantly, it doesn't give room for vehicles to move out of our way so that we can go by them safely and effectively and quickly, as most people would want if we're responding. So I think we are not a fan of that 11-foot at all. We would like to see it 12, 13. I know the buses have the same issue as us, but we're also going into neighborhoods where the buses don't go, and we need to be able to get to those areas.
Okay, thank you so much. So if that could be considered, you know, again, I know we're balancing a lot of different wants and needs here. And then the second is actually the second bullet point. So having been in a neighborhood where it was proposed that we were going to get rid of parking on one side of the street, I know that that is often contentious for people who have, you know, have had that opportunity or that luxury for long term. So I just have some personal input from a neighborhood where that happened, and we did end up retaining 2 side street parking on both sides of the street. The question, I know Chief Story had to step away, but my other idea is on the enforcement of making that an ordinance. So I feel like that would be pretty onerous for whoever would have to be going out and potentially ticketing folks who were parked, or I don't know what that would look like, but I would want that considered if we were going to put this in. And it can also, again, lead to a lot of fines and potential repercussions for folks who have been used to having that parking available. And that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor McClure.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions slash statements slash hopefully provoking a little bit more conversation. The bike parking, I would like to see mandatory bike parking. I think what this document becomes is an example of what our values are. And if we do want to move toward that, what would that look like for our city? No pun intended. But part of this too is making it equitable in ways for businesses as well. I'm going to give 2 examples. For example, Fiesta Foods, we chain up to the front there. I would love to see some bike parking there, and I know that there would be use for that. But conversely, on Madrid, there's an itty bitty little grocery store. We bike there, and we kind of hope for the best. We tie our bikes together. So what would that look like for that complex versus a larger grocery store to be able to offer that to customers, consider that as parts of routes, very fundamentally in terms of transit. So that would be my commentary for that. Going back to values, I'm going to echo what Dr. Wallace said earlier in terms of historical preservation. I think we've made some huge strides, and especially the last year, to clarify what the role is of this organization. I'd like to see what other counselors think. I've been going to the meetings. There's a lot of passion. There's a lot of fear of losing our history. And I think there's a component of that, but there's also a need to recognize what its role is. And I would like to have that clarified. I would like to know whether or not this council now, how it sees historic preservation. Because to me, I just don't want loss. And I also think there are opportunities. So I think that there's opportunities for affordable housing. I spoke to Dr. Berryman at one point, and we talked about how their role will be to have these conversations like, how can you fix your windows to make it historically appropriate, but also to save money? So I'd like to ask a little bit for my other counselors, what does this look like going forward? How do we envision it? And give them guidance on what they want to see for historical preservation. I think the plan is a great idea. I think we're on the way to get a new historical preservation specialist. I am curious, Sarah, the idea of adding that consultant in, does that echo in any other document or any other section that we can do something like that? But I do want to ask other counselors, how do you see historic preservation? How can we see this as an opportunity instead of something divisive? So I'm going to leave that there, and I'm going to let you go, and then I'm going to let them go.
Mayor, Councilor McClure, we were discussing that as that was being brought up as being, a consultant coming on board or being that defined within the definition. That is something we can look at. Per the certified local government, they do have consultant listed on there as well. The main reason we don't like to list position is because positions definitely can be changed, modified, and we don't have to do code amendments every other day if a position changes. And so that is something we definitely can consider as part of the definition moving forward with some of the departments.
Thank you. And so I would be in favor of something like that if that might be something we could look at. But I am going to challenge my other counselors to talk about historic preservation in a little bit more visionary way. We don't have to make any sort of defined statements, but I would like to hear what you think in terms of keeping some of Las Cruces' history with us.
Councilor Flores.
Thank you, Mayor Enriquez. You want to hear my comment about, I'm 100% behind historic preservation. And I've attended the meetings. I know some of the people in the audience. And there's a lot of squeaky wheels out there. But there's a lot of passion, just a lot of passion on preservation. I know there's been, with a former employee here, and there was some sort of a falling out. But it seems, with all due respect to my fellow lovers of historic preservation, you seem really upset all the time. And so when you come up here, or when I, go to your meetings, it's like, But, and this, the historic, is it a commission? Is it a committee? And, I just hate to see that dissonance and to have that. But I feel very strongly about preserving our history and having, like, for example, would the word commission get you more money from the federal government? It would. Okay, they're saying no. You're saying yes. Okay, I'm gonna send a letter to our President Trump and see what he says. But with all due respect, it's just very. It's I would just like to see your committee, your organization, proceed, and it seems like that one word is holding you back, and I don't understand that. But then I'm not there. But I do want to thank our planning our planning people. It's very thorough. I think that, the discussion I had with the two of you about Canberra Street, I think it's Canberra. I remember asking Chief Smith, who's not here, about that street. And I don't, it'd be good maybe to go out there and see how wide it is, because a friend of mine lives there. And I said to her, why would you buy a place here? She said, it was the only one I could afford. Oh, okay. But the fire trucks, they do fit in the street, but they can't open the side panels, which is where all the life-saving stuff is. So if you could look into that, maybe 11 feet isn't enough, given on what the deputy chief just reported. So I would like to get past the barrier between the city and the Historic Preservation Committee. So anyway, my heart does go out to you, and that's all I have to say for now. Thank you.
Did you have anything, Councilor?
No, I think I just wanted to share my gratitude to everyone who's been working really diligently and collecting a lot of diverse inputs. Again, similar to what Councilor Graham said in terms of the range of things that you all have heard and assimilated in this process. It's extraordinary, and I really appreciate the feedback that you've given to us and the opportunities that we've had and the significant opportunities for folks to contribute to this. And I think moving forward, I do think there are some things around the edges that I believe we can, that hearing this today, we can sort of think about and incorporate. I do think that we should have a big conversation about park funding and how we do that, and I think that's part of the idea of the park impact fee being in the future. And I think I look forward to that conversation as the place where a lot of those parks that have been built appear. So I look forward to those evolving conversations, the dark sky conversation as well. I think we can have a robust conversation about what that means. As far as historic preservation, I tend to agree, Councillor McClure. I think Dr. Wallace's comments really ring true with me. I would like for us to have a really clear perspective on sort of where we're headed with historic preservation. I think there's a lot of expertise that can be tapped into. I know that systematically we've been sort of thinking about some properties, really a small number of properties that the city owns, but I think understanding how we sort of plan and integrate and understand history as it exists and have a strategy going forward for that. I think that would be a really meaningful role for the Historic Preservation Committee, and I think that was part of the original intent of that committee, and understanding the research that I've done and understanding the origin of the committee and what folks have shared along the way. But I would say this, I think that the point of this process is to break down barriers that have existed historically, and I think, to be frank, I think the Historic Preservation Commission is advocating strongly for their role to be one of barrier, and I just think that this entire process, the point of this is to break down barriers, and so I think I would ask the historic preservation folks in the room to think of themselves as a generative partner in these conversations, more than sort of a functional group that overrides things. That's been one of my asks throughout all of Realize is things should not be being appealed to City Council like carports. It's not our area of expertise. There's no reason to have a city body weighing in on things that can be understood better by the experts who are most proximate to the topic, and I think that's true of historic preservation as well. And so I think that the city can do better in terms of understanding how we interface with that in terms of historic preservation, but I also think I'm going to ask our colleagues to sort of consider how the historic preservation group can contribute to that strategy of really preserving history, understanding history, and supporting that in our building. So just as far as your request, Councillor McClure, that's sort of where I come through on that. And I'm really happy that we probably aren't going to hear about carport, just as a very symbolic conversation. Our development code is outdated. You all have done extraordinary work to bring it up to a different place and to integrate an extraordinarily broad range of voices. I look forward to hearing the presentations in February, and I just really appreciate the conversations that have happened so far. I hope some of the very specific things that we talked about today can be incorporated, and I really appreciate the work that you all have done. And I look forward to not having to decide if someone's carport has to be torn down ever again. Thank you so much for nothing, if not that. So that's sort of my perspective, and I appreciate the opportunity to weigh in and, again, give feedback in the many places that we have had the opportunity to give feedback.
Good, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thanks, Mayor. Thank you, Sarah, Chris, our consultants, everybody, the TAC. I was just, earlier when you started the presentation, I was thinking about when we hired the consultants, we still had a councilor, Gabe Vasquez, and now we have a congressman, Gabe Vasquez. So it's definitely been a long time to get here. So thank all of you for all the work that you've put into this, all the experts, everybody. Okay, I scared Mayor because I was like, Mayor, I think I have a lot. I'm gonna try to just condense some of my pieces. I think conversations will continue. But given that Councilor McClure, sort of called us into that question that is important, I feel like behind the conversation of committee to commission is this current of fear that is this decision on the road to getting rid of the HPC, right? I feel like there's this fear, and this fear comes from, I think, years probably of mistrust from both, honestly, not even years, decades, right, of choices that the city has made that has impacted our historic preservation pretty negatively, right? And so there's this mistrust. I also feel like we can't codify trust building here. That really has to be up to the members of the commission, to the advocates of historic preservation, and to city staff, and of course this governing body. There is zero desire in me to see something like an HPC go away. I think their role is incredibly important. Their role is necessary. I also feel like I don't often hear, I sit on the Utilities Commission, which is pretty significant and important commission. I think I'm very serious about who I appoint to things like the P&Z because of the kind of power that they carry. And more often than not, I am hearing about the ways that members of HPC have crossed the line, where it happens really only with this committee group of folks that I feel like folks, staff and others have felt disrespected. And I do feel like there is an important conversation to be had together about how we continue to build trust. I do not, I think there's stuff in here that I'm gonna get to, like some parks things that are gonna have like monumental, serious, important, good implications for a long time. Commission to committee, I don't necessarily place in that same category. What I think needs to happen is for a commitment from members of this advocacy group, members of this committee, to come together with staff and talk about how we change culture, how we change the way we interact with each other. That needs to happen. That can't be codified. I do also feel that naming a position here feels really odd. Are there any other positions that are staff positions that are named specifically in Real Life, Chris?
Mayor Pro Tem, Chris Faber for the record. Through Realize, we are trying to get away from staff positions being named for the reasons that Sarah mentioned before. So we're trying to go to a director or director designee when it references a specific city department. Currently, there are lower level staff positions mentioned in Muni Code, and I know there's going to be a larger effort once Realize is adopted to go back and sort of clear those up as well. So that's what we did in this attempt with just the land use code.
Thank you. And I think I could sit up here and say many things, and if that fear is still there, then that's what's gonna lead the culture of this committee, and I don't want that to be the case, right? Like, I think this body has expressed very clearly, and not even just this body, but previous bodies, that historic preservation must, there should be a priority on that. And so I can only speak for myself, right, and say that that is not a desire that I have, is for this group of folks and the duties of this group to go away. So that's, I don't know if that's sufficient or not, Councilor McClure. I know that you have the majority of, the impact in District 1, and so, but thank you for that question. Okay, I have several other pieces that I want to just touch on. And Sarah, you did talk about this a little bit in Chapter 3. Okay, let me back up a little bit, because so much of how I dove into this and how I have been looking at this is through the lens of revitalization. It's through the lens of the metropolitan redevelopment areas. To me, those are very critical zoning designations that I hope all of us are really trying to look through that lens of how do we, speaking of wrongs that have been committed for decades, many years ago, decades ago, there was a decision that was made, maybe unconscious decision that was made about where we place our focus in the city, which caused a neglect to many other areas of our city. West Picacho, El Paseo, South Solano, these areas, it didn't just happen that they became underrepresented and neglected, right? There was choices that were made that made them feel like this. And so now I feel like with Realize, we have an opportunity to correct some of those wrongs. And because of that, I want us to have that very clear lens of how do we approach many of these with those in mind. And I think, to me, that means with a lot of flexibility, with room for flexibility. And I understand that there's this push and pull of, well, if we have standards and we're always gonna waive them, then what do we even have them for? The reality, though, is that for now, in the meantime, areas like the MRAs, which I hope by the end of next year we have many more other than 2, is that we are cultivating growth and ensuring that we are seeing these areas get back to what they used to be, even better. So I'll say that as I approach the next couple of pieces. In Chapter 3, P&Z recommended a couple of things that I feel I have some concerns with. For example, the special use permits around drive-throughs, which could impact many things, including a brand new bank that's going up on El Paseo, and also the commercial parking lots. I have several of these in my district, like By the Belgium, actually like Les Combs near Mesilla, that is still in District 4. And so can you just address some of those pieces, give some examples of the implications of this that I don't necessarily agree with?
I can start, and then I can turn it over to Sarah if she has more information to give. So, Chris Favor again for the record. I think the intent from P&Z was to continue to foster this idea of more pedestrian-friendly, walkable type communities. Totally. And in that context, I can appreciate the desire to try to eliminate things that are specifically vehicle-centric. I think specific to the entire urban area, I think it does create it's a very large footprint of the city that would be impacted. It would make any of those businesses within that area that currently have a drive-through or a car wash or a gas station, at some point they could be non-conforming if that business was to go out and a period of time lapsed before something else came back in. So I think that's something for council to consider across the entire urban area. So I can see how some of that could be good standards for new development. I would caution against the entire urban area, although I know there are some elements of Elevate that do speak to moving in that direction. I will say from an economic development standpoint that does add more time and more cost to a new business that could potentially be starting up. Now they would have to go through the special use permit process, which would take them to planning and zoning. There's additional time, maybe they have a loan that they're waiting on to pay back. So there are other things to factor in when looking at the need to, or the thought of putting a special use permit in place for those specific things.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. And Councilor Corrin said it really beautiful about this really being a catalyst, like for getting rid of barriers. And I feel like making a bunch of these properties non-conforming properties only actually adds a barrier to a place that we're trying to put so much attention into. So I, for one, I think would say not to have these as special use permits for drive-throughs, gas pumps, car washes, those kinds of places in the urban place, as well as the parking lots. Payday loans, at risk of getting placed on a billboard again, I don't particularly care how many SUPs payday loans have to go through. Well, maybe I'll get on a billboard after that. But the other places I do feel like require, perhaps instead of making them non-conforming, give them some design options, right? Some design recommendations for how they can still keep pedestrians in mind. Sarah, there's a couple of things you mentioned about we should leave that to the technical manual. I feel like that is really important, and that would be at least what I would like to see as we come into February. And then I think, similarly with dark sky, I do not feel well equipped to say, yes, put that in here right now. I think we can do a work session in the future. I have no idea what Albuquerque has just done. I also, with this in particular, lighting, landscaping, I also wanted to be really mindful, again, of the flexibilities that we give businesses in the metropolitan redevelopment areas. I just had a meeting with Chris and other folks from a brand new business on West Picacho, and they're trying to do so much, and there were so many barriers placed to them being able to open, and I feel like that is the opposite of where we want to go. And so again, I just want to reiterate those pieces. I really have appreciated, I'll wrap up, Mayor. I think I really appreciated, especially working with the home builders in this new iteration of what park development could look like. My computer fell asleep and I wanted to read something that I found. Because I think while change is very scary, so interesting, I found just earlier today this, I think maybe an op-ed or something from Steve Ramirez from 2013 about the change that happened then from, I think, so there was one year where it went from 1,300 to 2,600. 800 to 2,600, that's major, right? In utilities, we talk about this all the time, not shocking ratepayers with those kinds of increases. That's why it's important to evaluate any kind of impact fees on a more regular basis than, let's say, 10 years, for example. So in 2013, the vote came to council and they decided to keep it at 2,600, correct? Is that sort of how the process has gone?
Mayor Pro Tem, at the time it actually was 800. In 2013, it was approved to be adopted at 2,600.
Thank you. And I'm not even trying to talk about this too long because this is a different conversation. I do just want to say that there is this op-ed that 10 years ago talked about very similar things that we're hearing today, right? The fear of how we talk about parks, that it'll create this inability for people to purchase homes. And so all the fear is the same, and I would venture out to say that in the last 10 years, we've seen a lot of growth and plenty of growth. And so what I would want to just encourage folks to stay at the table, to have these conversations with us. And I've really appreciated the sort of boldness that staff has come to council regarding some of the park considerations. And so I just wanted to lift that up and appreciate that. And then I'm just gonna take a quick look at my notes. There's two things from comments that I wanted to address. Was one, the bike parking. I also feel like that's really important. The one consideration I would say is to give flexibilities to businesses and time for that so that we are not holding up business permits if they don't have a bike rack installed, right? And so, but I do feel like bike parking is really important. The other piece that was brought up that I thought was interesting, and I hope you can talk about it, is the zoning designation and the character designation about making that a single step instead of two separate steps.
Mayor Pro Tem, and councilors, essentially it is going to be a one-step process. The way that it would run is an applicant would come forward with a zone change. The zone change would then go forward to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and from there it goes to City Council. If Planning and Zoning makes a recommendation to adjust elevate because they do not feel it aligns, that would be the recommendation to City Council. City Council in turn would decide if it does align or if it does not. So if you're looking at a bigger area that is impacted, that does not maybe meet the neighborhood character, or it doesn't align with elevate, then staff at that point would come back and look at elevate to see if it's going to meet the needs of that growth or through it as a city, and then make their recommendation to council. And so the zoning process is really going to be the step that comes in from the applicant or from the developer. The rest of that portion is going to be for City Council to determine if it's going to match what the growth pattern should be for the city. At that point, we would want to go back and actually change elevate if it does not align.
Okay, so Sarah, I'm sorry, Sarah, that was a little bit confusing for me. So for these kind of zoning changes request, it would only come to City Council the one time?
Mayor Pro Tem, that's correct, unless there is a time. So if I were to submit an application today, I'm going to actually go to Planning and Zoning Commission. So say if I am taking my neighborhood 1 and going to a neighborhood 2, the character areas are all combined within these. And so you're going to have neighborhood 1 urban, neighborhood 1 suburban. This is how the zoning designations will work. And so it's going to tell you essentially how you get your densities. So if I come in and I want to go from a neighborhood 1 urban to a neighborhood 1 suburban, then I'm going to submit a zone change. Through that process, staff's going to evaluate if it's going to blend with the neighborhood, is it going to meet the intent, is this zone change appropriate? Because it would be no different than the current zone change process of identifying if it's a spot zoning. We wouldn't take one zone out of an entire area and say this one can be something very different. So we're going to look at compatibility. That would then move to the Planning and Zoning Commission for recommendation to City Council. And so at one time, you're going through one process. The only time the process would become essentially a hold or basically a postponement would be if council determines that it does not meet elevate, or it basically doesn't meet our plan. Then staff would go back to evaluate how it would meet the plan or what would be maybe best options if we were to reevaluate elevate Las Cruces, because we haven't done it at time. So really it's one process for the applicant. It just may have a hold once it gets to council if there's discrepancies, if it doesn't match the plan, if it's not what council wants to move forward. But that's also to the discretion of council. If we come forward with a proposal or the applicant comes forward and City Council determines it does not require elevate's amendment, then you have the right to go ahead and approve or amend or change as you would need.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. I think just as we talk about these things, the goal is to eliminate the amount of barriers, right? And so that still feels really convoluted to me, but again, these hypotheticals are really difficult to talk in terms like this. So if you feel, I know that you've been, I think, a huge proponent of that as well, that flexibility. And so if you feel like that is a process that's going to work, then I trust that guidance as well. Thank you. Councilor Corrin, I saw you.
No, I was just gonna follow up, but I think I understand. Like one justification that would go for both types of character and zoning thing, right, from the applicant.
Mayor Pro Tem, it's not necessarily justification, it's just, does it fit within your area? So we wouldn't want to see necessarily, maybe if you're in a rural area, going directly to an urban, unless there's some kind of justification or there's some kind of plan or there's some kind of, if it comes with affordability, if it comes as part of a master plan. So we'd be looking at it as a whole. We wouldn't just want to go ahead in the middle next to Oregon Mountains and say that's now going to become an urban area, because that characteristic is very different.
And I guess that was the follow-up, sorry, that I just wanted to say. Part of the point of this is to have way fewer of those than we ever have before, right? Like we have a lot of inconsistent, I think, or historical, unchanged, grandfathered in things that I feel like this part of this is, most of these things are conforming with what we expect now, and so it's much less likely that this would ever come into that review process or that people would need to do that. Is that like an accurate description of what the goal of Realize is?
Mayor and Councilor Cran, that's correct. A lot of our existing developments will be that way. We still expect to see new development coming in areas that may not be zoned, but that's where we get those master plans. We're going to see how it aligns and what actual development we can actually get proposed around roads, maybe from the thoroughfare plan that have not been designed yet.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to thank you for asking that, Mayor Pro Tem. I wanted to understand too, like, when you said when it comes to council, like, that's when we get all, like, nervous because, and we do not love an agenda full of 18 zoning changes. So that's not just because we don't like that, but because we're ill-equipped to make those decisions, and it's better done through comprehensive zoning reform. So thank you again. Sorry, bye.
I don't even want to say that it's because we're ill-equipped. I don't necessarily think that. I think I just remember that conversation we had about the carport of this woman who her husband has passed away. Like, it just felt like it didn't need to go through this process at city. Like, it didn't need to get here, right? So I feel like that's at least the point for me. And then I do want to just say that I feel like maybe double-sided parking on streets could be also a traffic calming situation. So certainly is on my street. And so perhaps I would just say to keep it that as well, but I know a couple folks have already said that. Again, I think lastly what I want to say is really encourage all of us, especially staff, to really look at this through the lens of MRAs as well, and to really consider what it is that we're trying to get done in areas of our community that have been for far too long neglected. So thank you very much.
We're good. Well, I just want to say thank you. I don't think we can say it enough for the gratitude for this. This is a code that has been outdated for years, for over 20 years. So it's a huge task to come together and put this together. So I just want to thank again Larry and Tim, David Cedillo, Tony Trevino, from Public Works, everybody that came together, the TAC committee. It's a lot of work. And Sarah, Chris, thanks for coming in, and the consultant. It's much needed. And what we're looking for is, like, the big picture is what I'm looking at is general, is to talk about a code that's user-friendly, that's inviting, and that's affordable. And that's what we want for our community. And I'll get to Councilor McClure. You talk about historic preservation, and that's I'm all about that. That's how we become inviting. People want to come and live in Las Cruces because of our culture, because of our history, because of who we are. So I think it's a great idea to have a plan. We need that specialist hired, whether it's a commission or a committee. I think what it is a plan, collaboration, and working together, because that's what makes Las Cruces who we are, and we need to develop around that. And so I'm all for having a historic plan and moving in that direction. I thought that was a great idea. Other things that I wanted to mention that I have just listed, like the dark skies. I think that's something we need to dive into a little bit more. It's not just about the MRAs, but it's any existing building. It becomes a challenge to bring it up to code, so we need to look at those things. So again, I go back to affordable and being user-friendly, so we need to really look at that for our MRAs and our existing vacant buildings that we want to be inviting so that we can attract new businesses, so we have to look at those options as well. The parks and the timing fees, I don't want to confuse zoning with fees, but it is something that we need to look at. And I think Mr. Moscato brought up dedication and recording, if that's something that staff would look at and make sure that we iron that out. And two, I'm with that staff to look at the two-step process. It might be 2 steps for us, it may be 1 step for them, but it's a lot of steps in the process. And that's what we're trying to say when I get back to being user-friendly and being affordable, because when it all is said and done, it really is the homeowner, and we want to make sure that we have affordable homes for people either to move into Las Cruces, to upgrade to another home, and it all comes and works together. So I think staff has done a great job. I think I've heard it before. Everybody has said that the new code, the plan is like 95 to 98% there, so great job. I know it's a long time coming. We just need to tweak these final things before we come up to February. But I know I had some more thoughts and ideas and some things, and I'll pass those on to the city manager. But I thank council for all their comments, and I thank the public for supporting, because, like I said, it is something that has been outdated, and we'll look to add and to help, how was I say, our developers and our home builders. It's like the one thing that we can do as a city is expedite things. It's a timing issue, because time is money. And if it helps our staff, so we're not bogged down with, is it this rule, is it that rule, is it this step, is it that step? So this really helps to be more efficient and effective, and it's a greater good for everyone. So thank you all for all your hard work, and tweak a few things, and I think we're good to go in February. Okay. Any other
Thank you,
comments by staff, anything?
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, I think that's all we had on the agenda for today. Motion to adjourn?
So moved by Flores.
Seconded, Corin.
This is on the motion to adjourn the work session. Councilor McClure?
Yes.
Councilor Matisse is absent. Councilor Graham is absent. Councilor Cran?
Yes.
Councilor Flores?
Yes.
Councilor Bencomo?
Yes.
And Mayor?
Yes.